I'm Tom Gillesberg, chairman of the Schiller Institute in Denmark and also with the Executive Intelligence Review. And I'm here at the Pakistani embassy to Denmark with His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Farooq, Ambassador of Pakistan to the Kingdom of Denmark since April 2020. And before that, the ambassador held several posts in connections with the United Nations, Counsellor alternate to the Rome-based UN agencies, Counsellor permanent mission of Pakistan to the UN, member of Pakistan's Security Council team, Director General dealing with counterterrorism at the UN and other multilateral forums, Director dealing with the UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, counterterrorism, UN peacekeeping, and other political and peace and security issues. So, Your Excellency Ambassador Farooq, I'm very glad you agreed to have us interview you, and you gave a speech to the Schiller Institute in Denmark's Afghanistan seminar in October 2021. Afghanistan, what now? Peace through economic development, where you especially described the dire situation in Afghanistan at the time and how the Afghanistan war had affected Pakistan. Since then, the people of Afghanistan have suffered through 7 months of winter conditions, and the humanitarian situation is much worse, probably the worst in the whole world. Could you please describe the humanitarian emergency for the people of Afghanistan right now?
Thank you very much, Tom. I would first of all like to thank you and the Schiller Institute for coming over to the Pakistan embassy and to discuss this important issue that is being faced by the people of Afghanistan and the region. And the Schiller Institute, I must say, has been doing a very good job in highlighting what is happening in Afghanistan. So I would like to begin by thanking you for that. So you have very rightly said that Afghanistan has been going through a very difficult situation. And when we met at the Schiller Institute in September, things were not as bad, but we could see which way the situation could go if the international community does nothing to help the people of Afghanistan. And unfortunately, what we had foreseen at that time did play out in the following period. What we have now know, and these are statistics that come out of the United Nations, is that over 22 million people in Afghanistan continue to face a dire humanitarian emergency. Over 1 million Afghan children are malnourished and at the risk of dying. So we have the winter period in particular has been very hard on the people of Afghanistan because of the food shortages, because Afghanistan had been facing a prolonged drought even before things happened in August of last year. So all that combined, and to put on top of that the economic situation which Afghanistan faced after the withdrawal of the international forces there. So that in particular has helped to further compound the humanitarian crisis being faced by the people of Afghanistan. It continues to be a very difficult situation there. The region itself, obviously, we have suffered from this conflict for over 4 decades, and we continue to do so. There is a lot of concern in Pakistan in terms of the suffering that is being faced by the people of Afghanistan. So it continues to be a very, very sad and difficult situation that we see which the people of Afghanistan are currently facing.
Well, obviously, much too little humanitarian aid has reached Afghanistan. The Schiller Institute has been pleading for emergency action. We also did that very much at the seminar together with you, to alleviate the sufferings of the Afghan people. And our founder and international president, Helga Sepp-LaRouche, has proposed Operation Ibn Sina, named after the great doctor, philosopher, and political advisor from the region, born in 980, also known in the West as Avicenna. Operation Ibn Sina is a call for mobilizing emergency humanitarian aid and building a modern health system as a focus for sparking the long-term development of Afghanistan's infrastructure and economy. What do you think of this, and what must be done to prevent even more millions of people from starving and many dying?
I think, and the position of the government of Pakistan in this regard is that the international community needs to come together and address, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. There is a need for engagement with the authorities in Afghanistan. There is a need for a coordinated provision of humanitarian assistance for the people of Afghanistan. So far, what we are seeing is that there is a sporadic effort, and obviously many countries that were Western countries that were present previously in Afghanistan, they no longer have any presence there. Then we also had a significant presence of the United Nations. So that also mostly is not there anymore as it was before the events of August 15th. Then there is this issue of how to deal with the authorities in Afghanistan. And what we generally see is an effort to try to bypass them when dealing with the people of Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is a large country in terms of its size, area, and also in terms of its the size of its population. It's over 40 million people. And the way we see it is that it is not possible, for a good coordinated humanitarian effort to reach the most vulnerable people in the country when you are trying to bypass the authorities. And this is something that we have been, calling upon the international community, that everybody needs to come together and look at what the humanitarian needs are in Afghanistan. And the other issues, the political issues, obviously those also have to be dealt with, but the priority has to be on how we can prevent further suffering in Afghanistan. Pakistan, as far as Pakistan is concerned, we have been trying to facilitate, for example, the UN humanitarian effort. Most of it in the past was also being routed through Pakistan, and we have an arrangement with the UN on how they can again direct their humanitarian actions through Pakistan. So that is happening, but again, I think the principal obstacle is this issue of the policies which the Western countries have come up with, is that whatever they do there, they have to bypass the authorities. And that in itself, I think, is preventing a more sort of sustained and coordinated effort to help the people there. So when you mention about the initiative which Helga Sepp-LaRouche has, wants to launch, I think this is a very good idea. It's something that should have a lot of traction, particularly for Muslim countries, because obviously Ibn Sina comes from our part of the world. And it could provide sort of a rallying point for Islamic countries to help the people of Afghanistan. So anything that can be done, we are of the view that there is a need there, and we have to. It is our obligation that we help those poor people there.
So could you say more about what the government of Pakistan concretely is proposing and what they're doing in relation to Afghanistan?
Well, being the most immediate neighbor of Afghanistan and a country which has suffered throughout the last 4 decades, both in terms of the humanitarian angle, we have been hosting over 4 million refugees at any given point of time, and over 3 million still continue to live in Pakistan. We have faced the security dimension of the instability in Afghanistan, especially over the last 20 years. So we have a deep interest in having a stable Afghanistan as our neighbor. And right after the events of August 2021, we have been coordinating with the international community, firstly in the evacuation of the international staff, diplomats, Afghan nationals that were, that the international community wanted to evacuate from there. We did that. We have been trying to coordinate efforts amongst the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. Pakistan hosted a conference in September, then of the 6 neighboring countries. Then another conference was held in Tehran in October. So we participated in that. We then hosted the meeting of the Troika Plus. So this is a grouping of China, Russia, the United States, and Pakistan. So we hosted that, and that on the sidelines of that meeting, there was also a meeting of this grouping with the Taliban delegation. Then we hosted the meeting, the emergency meeting of the Islamic countries' foreign ministers in December, which was focused specifically on the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. So our effort has been to promote engagement with Afghanistan, bring the international community together so that we specifically, we deal firstly with the humanitarian situation. Bilaterally as well, Pakistan has contributed, despite our economic difficulties, about $30 million in terms of humanitarian assistance that we have provided. We have been facing the challenge of COVID, and despite that, we have tried to keep cross-border movement of people as well as trade of goods and services open, so that the people of Afghanistan do not suffer more than they have to. And we recently also allowed a shipment of wheat from India. I mean, this is a sensitive issue in Pakistan, but for the benefit of the Afghan people, we allowed overland shipment movement of the Indian wheat from India through Pakistan to Afghanistan. So we continue to engage with the international community, in terms of what we can do to help Afghanistan.
Pakistan also organized, or there was a conference in Islamabad from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation about Afghanistan on March 22nd, 23rd this year. What was the result of this meeting?
Yes, as I mentioned in my previous response, actually the emergency session on Afghanistan was held in December. And there were two important outcomes of that conference. The first was that a special humanitarian trust fund was created for Afghanistan. And then the Organization of Islamic Cooperation also appointed a special representative to deal with the humanitarian situation. So these were the two key decisions that were taken at the December meeting. In March, we had the regular session of the Conference of Foreign Ministers of the OIC, which basically operationalized those two decisions that had been taken at the December meeting. So now that trust fund is operational, and countries have started to contribute money to that, which would then be channeled to Afghanistan through the Islamic Development Bank. So, I mean, the OIC itself has its own set of organizations that can deal with these issues, humanitarian issues, and that is something we feel very happy that we were able to coordinate and to have this work done for Afghanistan.
Now, what is your message to people in the US, in Europe, regarding Afghanistan and what should happen?
Yes, our consistent message to our European and other Western partners is that we have to come together. It's our obligation to help the people of Afghanistan. It is important to continue our engagement even with the authorities of Afghanistan. We do understand that there are sensitivities with regards to issues relating to political inclusion, as well as human rights, the rights of especially of women and girls. But we believe that in order to make progress on these issues as well, it is we have to continue our engagement. Pakistan has been, as I mentioned, we've been part of several initiatives in terms of trying to bring countries together on Afghanistan, and we have consistently joined the international community in expressing the same concerns that they have, in terms of human rights, in terms of political inclusion, and especially the rights of women and girls. So we share those concerns, but we believe that if we have to make progress, we continue our engagement with the country. Then the most important aspect, I think, that has to be addressed is the economic meltdown which has happened in Afghanistan, because without a functioning economy, you cannot deal with the humanitarian situation. I mean, the world cannot be expected to just keep pumping money in terms of providing food and medical assistance. The country has to eventually stand on its own feet. And for that, we have to ensure that the banking system of the country is functional, and we have to look at this issue of the sanctions that exist against the Taliban authorities, because when you have that kind of a situation, it is not possible for a country to business internationally. So these, I think, are some of the our key messages to our international partners, that how do we bring about stability in Afghanistan and take them out of the current sad situation.
This also includes, of course, that part of these sanctions has been to freeze all the accounts of the national government of Afghanistan, so they do not have Afghanistan's money to spend on dealing with the situation in Afghanistan. But it also means, it's also a big factor that Afghanistan has been cut off from the whole SWIFT system, which means that people, Afghanis, living abroad are not able to send money back home.
Exactly. So this is what, I mean, what I'm trying to say here is that the international connectivity of Afghanistan with the banking system, the banking system in Afghanistan basically has collapsed. There is an issue of liquidity, which the United Nations is trying to address, and we appreciate that. More needs to be done. When you mention about freezing of Afghan assets, again, yeah, I mean, they have the money to take care of their people for some time, but because of this whole sanctions thing, they don't have access to it. And lately also we were disappointed with this decision that part of that money has been sequestered to sort of pay, to compensate, the victims of, for example, the 9/11 attacks. So this again is an unfortunate, decision because that money is the money of the people of Afghanistan, and they need it. They are starving to death. So that consideration should have been given.
Well, now on top of all of the calamities, you can say, in that situation, we now also have a war between Russia and Ukraine, with the US and NATO actively engaged in many ways, and which also directly, of course, affect the situation with these enormously rising food prices and all of the other things involved. Now, could cooperation to help the people of Afghanistan maybe be a way for the great powers to begin to cooperate on solving problems?
Well, it has been most unfortunate, for the world as a whole, that we have this conflict in the heart of Europe in the 21st century, which was unthinkable until a few months back. And that has unfortunately, it has diverted the focus of the international community from grave humanitarian situations like Afghanistan, like Yemen, also some situations in Africa, and the entire focus is now on this war. So this is most unfortunate. Frankly, when I sitting in Europe and looking at the positions which the opposing sides have taken on this conflict, I really don't see a possibility, of some kind of a compromise. Linked, I mean, for example, cooperation on Afghanistan that could help solve this conflict. It has to be the other way around. There has to be peace in Ukraine which would be, for the betterment of the entire, I think, international community. And Pakistan was amongst the first countries that had raised these concerns that this conflict could have serious consequences for the global economy, and especially, I mean, for the developing countries that are dependent on import of, food items, grain, import of petroleum products. And it is playing out. I mean, you've seen what has happened in Sri Lanka. Pakistan itself is facing very serious, economic issues on the external front because we also import wheat. We also import most of our petroleum products. So it has put a serious strain on our economy, and I'm sure there are many other countries that are facing these difficulties. So what we urge, to all the players that are involved in this conflict is that we have to find a peaceful solution through dialogue, through diplomacy, because conflicts and wars don't provide any solutions. So that has been our consistent position in respect of Afghanistan, and that we say also in the case of Ukraine.
Well, most people and most politicians normally say, first we have to create peace, and once we have peace, we can begin to collaborate. the Schiller Institute has always insisted that it's the other way around. You create peace through development. That if nations engage with each other in really taking care of their common interests by having economic development, then you also have the opportunity for long-term peace. So the Schiller Institute is right now circulating a petition that was released a couple of days before the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, entitled "Convoke an international conference to establish a new security and development architecture for all nations, modeled on the 1648 Peace of Westphalia agreement, where after 30 years of war in Europe, and which really was over 100 years of war in Europe, where the conflicting parts then agreed that peace could only come about by taking into account the interests of every country. Also, the regional economic development programs are essential for increasing global security. So, do you have any comments on this proposal?
I think it's a good proposal, but if you look at it from a historical perspective, didn't this happen at the end of the Second World War? When we created the United Nations, and the United Nations Charter has all those elements, respect for territorial integrity, non-use or threat of use of force, solving disputes through peaceful means. All this was there, and then the whole architecture, global architecture, was created. The financial and economic architecture that was meant to promote peace and development, and it was felt. I mean, the European Union itself is the best example that once countries start to cooperate economically, then the chances of having a war is reduced significantly. So we are seeing this. We are seeing this in the Southeast Asian region, where we have ASEAN, and so once you have it, it is correct. But at the same time, we still see there are forces, or it's perhaps when a certain generation which has gone through these difficult times, they phase out, and there is a new generation that comes, and they forget about how destructive wars are, and you start seeing these happening. So there has to be a consistent effort by humanity that wars are no solutions. They don't provide any solutions, and we have to look at cooperation between the countries, and through that find peace. So I mean, this petition that you have launched, I mean, it's very timely, but now we have a war here, and we have to find a peaceful solution to it, because conflicts, as I said, are no answers to any differences between countries.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, it's been very interesting talking to you on these matters, and much more could be brought into the discussion. But is there anything else here, when we're at the end of the interview, you would like to say to the viewers of the interview?
Well, it's been an interesting time for me, serving as Pakistan's ambassador to a member of the European Union. And I believe that it is important to develop a better understanding of each other in order to have peace, stability, and global prosperity. The world is facing huge challenges. COVID was just one example, but the bigger challenge and threat that the entire globe is facing is climate change. And what we are seeing, for example, with the situation in Ukraine, is that it tends to dilute your focus to the towards the bigger challenges that we all are collectively facing. So there is a need for bringing the world together to address those challenges, and eventually everybody has a stake in that. So one of the key things that for us, which has come out of this conflict in Ukraine, was that we didn't want to take any further sides in any great power conflict, because we believe that developing countries, they have to focus on the betterment of their people, and we have to look at what bigger challenges we are facing in the future.
And also, when you have a conflict where the obvious onset question is, when will this escalate into thermonuclear war if the dynamic is not changed? It's difficult to see how can you be a winner by simply choosing sides.
Exactly.
And then it might be better to choose to change the dynamic.
That is correct.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you very much for the interview, and well, let's talk again later when hopefully some of these issues are getting a more interesting development, which gives more opportunity for actually solving the problems.
Thank you, Tom, and it's always a pleasure to interact with the Schiller Institute.